Yep.
So thank you all for coming, and especially on the Day of the Dead. And before I introduce our speaker, I want to make two announcements. Actually, well, kind of three announcements. Next time for the PCC Forum in 2 weeks, we have a slight change in our schedule. We're now having Ursula King come, which is a wonderful privilege to have her come speak with us. She is the author of Spirit of Fire, which is a biography of Terre Desjardins, and she's a professor of theology at the University of Bristol. So it's wonderful that she can come speak to us. And then Morgan Fitzgibbons, who is still presenting with us this semester, is going to be presenting in December. So our last 3 weeks of school, we have 3 forums in a row, and they're all going to be very exciting. And so my second announcement is about our forum on November 30th, which is the PCC faculty roundtable dialogue, and we're asking for questions from you for what they will talk about. And anytime, like, if a question pops into your head of something you've always wanted to ask the faculty or something you want to see them talk to each other about, email myself or Matt, and we will include it as part of that. So it's really going to be bringing the dialogue in with the whole community, which will be really exciting. My last announcement is Robert McDermott and Sean Kelly are speaking tonight, actually, so that's not the announcement. Thank you for being here and not leaving. At the San Francisco Waldorf High School, and they have a workshop tomorrow from 8:30 to 1. The title of the talk and the workshop is Psyche, Spirit, and the Soul of the World, Steiner and Jung in Dialogue. So if you're in the Steiner and Jung class, it is particularly pertinent. And I believe Robert said it costs $20 for the workshop tomorrow, but I don't quote me on that. Okay, I'm done with announcements. Now I am delighted to be able to introduce Elizabeth McAnally, who is a current doctoral student in PCC in the integral ecology track. She's writing her dissertation on water consciousness, and she has also been, for the last 6 years, she's been working for the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale, and she's been a newsletter editor, web manager, and a research assistant. She's taught many classes on philosophy, religion, ecology, Tai Chi at Pacifica Graduate Institute at the University of North Texas, Diablo Valley College at University of San Francisco, and then also here at CIS. Elizabeth is a wonderful musician. She plays flute, she plays bass guitar, she plays piano. She has an impeccable, exquisite singing voice, which I know many of you got to hear at Esalen. And I am continuously in admiration of her abilities. She's a practitioner of Hatha Yoga and Qigong and Tai Chi, and a number of other things that I can't even dream of pronouncing, but is in the email announcement that we sent out to you. She's a wonderful, gentle friend and beautiful soul, so please help me welcome Elizabeth McAnally.
Thank you so much. That's so sweet. Oh, making me blush and tear up. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see you. I haven't seen many of you since Esalen, so it's great to see your faces again. And also thank you, Matt and Becca, for this opportunity to present. Yeah, so maybe just to start off, I'd like to give you a little background about this talk. Okay, so the title is Yoga, Environmental Ethics, and the Anthropocosmic Vision. Okay, so most of you guys know about yoga, and I'll talk about that tonight. Most of you know about environmental ethics, and it is the anthropocosmic vision that I really want to focus on. And it's wonderful how this beautiful flyer was made. Matt and Becca picked the painting. I thought it looks great, and it's actually really fitting. I guess I'll pass it around. This is, yeah, it's a really nice representation of what anthropocosmic means. So this painting, for those of you who can't see the picture, it is, I think it's called Transfigurations, and it's the one where this human face is basically going, ah, and there's the earth as the body, and the moon is, I think, in the throat chakra, and the eyes and the ears flaming, there's flames all over, there's eyes all over, galaxies swirling all over. And this is, in a nutshell, I think, a wonderful picture of the anthropocosmos. Okay? And in fact, Alex Gray has given a lot of lectures on anthropocosmos. And I attended one of these lectures at Temple SF, maybe 2006 or 2007. And it was really awesome. I've been really loving Alex Gray's work for a long time. And so to be in a lecture with him and hearing him use the word anthropocosmos as a main focus, after I had started hearing the word myself, only recently before then, it got me thinking, okay, well, there's something to this. If one of the most influential artists of our time is using this word, and some of the really influential scholars of religion and ecology are also using this term, then let's look at it more. So yeah, and just to say a little bit more about Alex Gray, his Chapel of Sacred Mirrors, COSM, it's trying to encapsulate the anthropocosmic vision. And Alex Gray says this explicitly. And by anthropocosmos, we're talking about anthropos, the human, and cosmos, the world. And there's all different kinds of levels to cosmos. We could talk about the whole universe. We could talk about miniature cosmoses, and everything in between. So anything that's a world is a cosmos in the sense. Yeah. So that's just a little shout out to Alex Gray and his awesome work. And some of you might not know, but I love yoga, and that's kind of why I want to talk about it tonight. I don't get to talk about this practice very often, but it's been something that's really tied together my whole college experience. I started studying and practicing yoga back in 2001. I took a class at the University of North Texas on, let's see, it was South Asian Religion and Philosophy with Dr. George James, who is a dear friend who I traveled to India with a couple years ago. So after taking his class and learning, like, I think it was the first comparative religion class I'd ever taken, and it blew my mind. Growing up in the Christian tradition, not knowing much about other religions, and then hearing, oh wow, there's like Hindus and Buddhists and Jains, and like that was the focus of our class, and yoga was a big part, so I got really interested in the academic study of it, and then decided, well, let's try to embody this a little bit more. So that summer 2001, I took a hatha yoga class at a community college, and I got hooked immediately, and from then on started pretty much a daily practice of hatha yoga, where I would do, and I still do, like postures and breath work, meditation, chanting, and I found that it's just a wonderful way to help embody knowledge. You know, like yoga is about like stretching, and philosophy is in a sense stretching toward knowledge, and so just to get a sense for how our bodies and our minds and our spirits, it's all very much intertwined, and you can see this really evidently in yoga. So I'll be talking about that. So just to give you a little bit more background, so that my first studying of yoga and Hindu tradition, Buddhist tradition, that happened at the University of North Texas. And then I came to CIS, and one of the first classes I took here was a class on ecology and the yoga tradition with Laura Cornell. And that class really inspired this paper that I'll share with you guys. And also I'll be talking about this paper in a couple weeks at the American Academy of Religion conference in Chicago. So I thought that this could be a good opportunity to bounce back to some ideas and also to get out any nervousness that can happen easily with presenting in front of a bunch of people who aren't necessarily all that friendly in their seats, even though I'm sure they are. But yeah, so maybe that's enough about my background in yoga. Background in environmental ethics has been very rich. I got my master's at the University of North Texas in environmental ethics and philosophy, and now I'm studying religion ecology and integral ecology, and so how to act with a sense of care and respect for the earth and the body. It's very much alive for me. So whenever we're talking about anthropocosmos, I'm going to try to help situate it in the history of environmental ethics and the history of religion and ecology. Okay, so anthropocosmos is basically juxtaposed with this whole dichotomy that's really relevant to the field of environmental ethics. The dichotomy between an anthropocentric environmental ethic and a non-anthropocentric environmental ethic. Okay? And so anthropocentric environmental ethics, just basically an anthropocentric vision at all is where the human has center of value, and the human is juxtaposed against the world, and the world is basically seen as a means or a tool to fulfill human purposes. Okay? That's generally what people mean when they say anthropocentric. And this kind of worldview has been blamed for most, if not all, of the environmental crisis, ecological crisis, the cosmological crisis that we're currently in. So the field of environmental ethics has tried to respond to this tendency for humans to set themselves up and against the world. And they've, in environmental ethics, there have been posited certain non-anthropocentric environmental ethics. Okay? And some of these include biocentric egalitarianism, where the center of value is given to any living thing. Another one would be ecocentric environmental ethics, where the center of value is given to whole ecosystems. Okay? And these non-anthropocentric environmental ethics are great, but they still have some problems. And so some of the problems could include like not knowing how to deal with human suffering, or so say like not knowing how to deal with sexism and racism, violence, displacement. And so to help kind of situate, like how can we bridge the gap between a non-anthropocentric environmental ethic and an anthropocentric environmental ethic? And that's where the anthropocosmic vision comes in. Okay? So by anthropocosmic, it's anthropos, the human and the world. But instead of being diametrically opposed to one another, the human and the world are seen to be intimately intertwined with each other. Okay? So it's not like setting up an opposition, but it is a sense of being embedded, intertwined, woven together with the world, human and the world together. Okay? So in this little presentation, what I want to do is explore the history of the term anthropocosmic in the field of religion and ecology, and then I will look at an ecological cosmology of yoga. And then what I'll do to close is look at anthropocosmic environmental ethics in yoga tradition in the US. Okay? So that's in a nutshell what I'll be doing. Okay? So anthropocosmic in religion and ecology. Okay? So in case you guys don't know, there's a wonderful series of publications that Raimon Panikkar and John Grimm have helped to bring together on the religions of the world and ecology. And in these books, they're basically conference papers of different conferences that happened between 96, 98, maybe some happened up until 2000. And so you can find books on Christianity and ecology, or Hinduism and ecology, indigenous traditions and ecology, you know, all these world religions and ecology. Awesome, thick volumes on each. And in the series forward to these publications, Raimon Panikkar and John Grimm use the word anthropocosmic. And they use it to describe the traditions of Confucianism and Taoism. Okay. And so they say that within Confucianism and Taoism, the anthropocosmic vision describes the continuity of creation. And they say that it describes a seamless interconnection between the divine, human, and natural worlds. Okay? So it's not just about human and the world, anthropos and cosmos, but there's sense the intertwining of the two is where divinity is happening. That might not be a great picture, but divinity is permeating throughout this human world interrelationship. Okay? And so they're using the term anthropocosmic to describe Confucianism and Taoism because these traditions focus, instead of looking at a transcendent divinity, they have a more immanent divinity. And particularly in light of the notion of qi, or life force, or material spiritual force that flows throughout the universe and that interconnects all things. Okay? And so matter and spirit are kind of bridged with this term, with qi and with the larger anthropocosmic vision. And they're borrowing the term anthropocosmic from a Confucian scholar named Du Ming. And here is an awesome quote by Du Ming, who says that humans are an integral part of the chain of being, encompassing heaven, earth, and the myriad things. However, the uniqueness of being human is the intrinsic capacity of the mind to embody the cosmos in its conscience and consciousness. Let me repeat that. The uniqueness of being human is the intrinsic capacity of the mind to embody the cosmos in its conscience and consciousness. Okay? And he goes on to say, through this embodying, the mind realizes its own sensitivity, manifests true humanity, and assists in the cosmic transformation of heaven and earth. Okay? So anthropocosmic in the sense of embodying the cosmos as a human in your consciousness and your conscience. Okay? And so this sense of an anthropocosmic worldview is basically describing a microcosmic, macrocosmic relationship. Okay? The human as a microcosm in the larger cosmos. Okay? And there is a wonderful Neo-Confucian scholar named Zheng Zai who writes about this idea really beautifully. And he says this, and this is in his Western inscription, which he posted on the western wall of his study. And I don't know why it's not up on my western wall yet, but maybe tonight it will go up. It goes, heaven is my father, and earth is my mother, and even such a small creature as I finds an intimate place in their midst. Therefore, that which extends throughout the universe I regard as my body, and that which directs the universe I consider as my nature. All things, all people are my brothers and sisters, and all things are my companions. One who puts his moral nature into practice and brings his physical existence to complete fulfillment can match heaven and earth, and one who penetrates spirit to the highest degree will skillfully carry out their will. Okay? So you can carry out the will of the universe if you learn how to embody the universe, if you learn your place in the cosmos, and learn how to see all our relations. Okay, so that's kind of what it's getting at, I think. Okay, and so Dui Ming says that this Western inscription of Zhengzai is a perfect elucidation of the anthropocosmic vision of Tian Ren Hai, which is translated as the unity of heaven and humanity. And it's a unity that's also understood to embrace the earth. Okay? And this is really big in Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism, where you have basically a triangle where human is here, and then we have earth and the heavens. And so this triad of human, the natural world, and the divine world completely intertwined with each other. Okay? And in this worldview, the human isn't alienated, but is in a relationship with the world, with the divine, where each aspect informs the other. Okay? Each aspect helps the other to understand how to be. Okay? So there's a Taoist scholar who also uses the term anthropocosmic. And this is James Miller, who says that the human body has its roots in an economy of cosmic power, which demands that we take absolutely seriously the concept of our personal implication in the single fabric of the environment. Okay? And James Miller is drawing from the work of Christopher Schipper, who writes this, and I think this is excellent. He says, each person is responsible for the Tao. Each person embodies the Tao. The preservation of the natural order depends absolutely on the preservation of this natural order and harmony within ourselves, and not on some outside authority. The environment is within us. To regulate the world, we have to cultivate ourselves to tend to our inner landscape. So this whole sense of an anthropocosmic vision is one way to see how religions of the world are currently entering into their ecological and cosmological phases. Mary Evelyn Tucker writes about this, and she says that the human person is becoming decentered and recentered amidst the great concentric circles of life. Okay? So just imagine this concentric circle thing going on, where she goes on to say, from the individual to social circles, to other species, to ecosystems, to the entire cosmos. Okay? And so she says that it's like ripples in a pond. The circles where we find ourselves located just keep expanding out. And so I think that's a wonderful metaphor for anthropocosmic vision. Okay. So another scholar that I think is really helpful for explaining what anthropocosmic means is Mircea Eliade, the historian of religion. And he uses the term anthropocosmic all throughout his work. Okay, so in Patterns in Comparative Religion, he says that an anthropocosmic experience is a magico-religious experience where the human person becomes transformed into a living cosmos, open to all the other living cosmoses by which he is surrounded. Okay? So in a sense, what's happening here is a way to understand how the pores of our body are really porous, and we can learn how to open up and connect with all the other living things in the world, regardless of if they're living or not. They're part of the same fabric that we're made out of. The same spirit flows through us. Okay. And so Eliade says in Images and Symbols, another book, he says that that the anthropocosmic symbolism is really evident when you study the history of religions. Okay? And he says that that humans can recover the symbolism of their body. And he says that the body is an anthropocosmos. And this kind of symbolism is, he says, one variety of archaic symbolism, and it also contains some kind of new existential dimension. Okay. And he goes on to say in The Sacred and the Profane that we can think of anthropocosmic homologies, you know, whenever we think of microcosmic, macrocosmic correspondences. Okay. And so you see this throughout a lot, if not all, the religions of the world, where the human body and the cosmos, there's some kind of reflection, like the human is a miniature of the larger. And so we can think of the belly or the womb as a cave. The intestines are like a labyrinth. Breathing is like weaving. Veins and arteries are like the sun and the moon. The backbone is like the axis mundi. Okay. And there's a phenomenologist, Paul Ricoeur, who also talks about this anthropocosmic experience. And he writes that the human person first reads the sacred on the world, on some elements or aspects of the world, on a fragment of the cosmos that gathers together the sectors of anthropocosmic experience. Okay. So just in brief, the anthropocosmic experience is one where the human and the cosmos are mutually enfolded in a way that reveals manifestations of the sacred. Okay. So just to summarize this term anthropocosmic, within the history of religion and ecology, it comes from two different strands. One is is religious studies, and another is phenomenology. Okay, so Due Ming, the Confucian scholar, he writes about anthropocosmic vision. James Miller, the Taoist scholar. I didn't talk about William Chittick, who's an Islamic scholar who uses the term. In a second, I'll talk about Raimon Panikkar, a Hindu scholar who uses the term. And then the historian of religion, Mirsha El-Ada. Okay, so that's all within religious studies. And then in the realm of phenomenology, we have Paul Ricoeur, but also folks like Gaston Bachelard and Gabriel Marcel. So if you want a more in-depth study of this term anthropocosmic, you should look at Sam Mickey's essay on the anthropocosmic vision. I'm sure if we email him, we will get it. Okay, so now that I've looked at anthropocosmic vision, anthropocosmic experience in the history of religion and ecology, I want to look at how is it used in yoga. Okay? So Raimon Panikkar has a book called The Vedic Experience, and he uses the term anthropocosmic pretty much synonymously with other terms like the anthropocosmic, or God, theos. The anthropocosmic, cosmotheandric, and theocosmological. And so these terms all point to a unity between the human, the world, and divinity. And Panikkar uses this term anthropocosmic unity. He shows how it's embedded in the Chandogya Upanishad, where the universal self is said to have the heaven as his head, the sun as his eye, the wind as his breath, space as his body, earth as his feet. And then even more broadly, we see how the individual self, Atman, is understood to be one with the universal self, Brahman. Okay. Similarly, there's a cosmotheandric communion of the creation sacrifice that's depicted in the Purusha Sukta of the Rig Veda. So within the Purusha Sukta, man, Purusha, the primordial man, is sacrificially divided up into all the aspects of the world, including Animals are made out from the body, liturgical formulas, the caste system, cosmic powers. And also, here's another list. We have from his spirit comes the moon, from his eyes the sun, from his mouth Indra and Agni, from his breath the wind, from his navel the air, from his head the sky, from his feet the earth, from his ears the points of the compass. Okay? And so this cosmic sacrifice is basically embedded in all forms of sacrifice in Vedic Hinduism. Okay? And yeah, like you can look at how any particular ritual of sacrifice is symbolic of the larger sacrifice, the larger cosmic sacrifice. Okay? And Eliade says, every sacrifice repeats the initial sacrifice and coincides with it. Okay? So furthermore, Eliade says that when the Vedic ritual of sacrifice, yajna, when that was internalized through yoga, then the body became the microcosmos. Okay? And so he says the aspirant of yoga realizes the anthropocosmos through a yogic meditation. So one of the things that Eliade was talking about whenever he's drawing up from one of the Upanishads about how breath is connected with weaving, he explains this more in Yoga, Immortality, and Freedom, where he says that air weaves the universe and breath weaves man. And this symbolism of weaving developed in India into the grandiose concept of cosmic illusion, or Maya, and elsewhere into concepts of the life thread and a fate as spun by certain goddesses. Okay? And so when practitioners of yoga practice pranayama, or control of breath or life force, they're able to participate in this cosmic weave of Maya. Okay? So I'd like to look a little bit more about prana and pranayama. Okay? So prana is, is often related to breath or life force. There's some really strong parallels. I don't want to conflate all these terms, but there's really strong parallels between prana in the Indian Hindu tradition, parallels with chi in the Chinese tradition, ki in Japanese, ruach in the Hebrew, spiritus in the Roman, pneuma in the Greek, lung in Tibetan, and all of these words are, it's very similar to breath, not quite breath, but oftentimes people, call it, okay, well, let's just look at breath, because it's so easy to see how life force is intimately related to breath. Once you stop breathing, your life force is gone, and it's really evident. So whenever a practitioner of yoga works on controlling the breath, you're able to see how your own breath is basically the breath of everything around you. And the boundary between the human and the world becomes really blurry. And you're able to pretty much embody the world through breath, or through breath work, through energy work. Okay? So alongside practices of pranayama, we have practices of asanas, or postures. And these practices are another way that people who practice yoga can learn how to embody this anthropocosmic vision and learn how to see their body as an anthropos. Okay? So, as Eliade mentioned, seeing your spine as Mount Meru. Okay? So seeing how you are basically centered around the axis mundi. Like there's a central channel running through you, and it's connected with the center of the world. Okay? And likewise, if you stand tall and supported in Tadasana or mountain pose, you can learn how to think like a mountain. Okay? When you stand in the tree pose, then, let's see, how do we do it? Like something like that. You can learn how to embody a tree. Stand rooted and firm. Your roots intertwined with others around you. When you perform sun salutation, Chandra Namaskar, or moon salutation, Chandra Namaskar, you can participate in solar and lunar powers of the cosmos. And it's kind of obvious, but it's worth saying that many asanas are imitating plants and animals, also imitating great yogic figures of the past. And so the fact that there's this imitation of the world, of other kinds of relationships, it's one way to see how there's some kind of respect and care for those outside of the self. There's some kind of understanding how there's a really intimate relationship with others whenever you practice asana. Okay? So another form of, another way that you can work on practicing anthropocosmic experience is through a yogic practice called observing the 5 great elements. This is called Pacha Mahabhuta. Okay. The 5 great elements. In Christopher Key Chapel down at Royal Marymount University in LA, he writes about this, this practice of observing the 5 elements. And so the 5 elements, he's referring to the yogic Hindu tradition, is referring to earth, water, fire, air, space. Okay? And so just imagine, like if you gaze at a bowl of water, you can have an anthropocosmic experience when you're doing this. And Chappell explains how this can happen. The practice, the traditional practice is, so you look at this bowl of water and then you associate words that are related to water that are coming up for you whenever you're doing this practice. You can do it with any of the elements. And as you associate words, you're training the mind and you're seeing how those words that are related to water also apply to yourself. Okay? And so you can start seeing how rivers and streams are like your blood, like how rain is like your tears, how dew is like your sweat, how the ocean is like this amniotic fluid that we're all born out of. So you start seeing this kind of microcosmic, macrocosmic relationship whenever you start observing the elements. And so Chris Chappell says that this is one way to develop an intimacy with the elements. He says, in the most intimate of ways, the world cannot exist without the body in which we dwell. Okay? And yeah, I just think that's so beautiful, like learning how to gain intimacy with the elements and how that can help us find our human role in the greater world. Seeing how the material of our body is shared with everything in the world. Like we're made up of the same stuff, and there's something very special about that. And so let's see, let's also look at the role of mantra with this anthropocosmic vision. Okay, so let's consider the mantra Om. Okay, very simple, very primordial, Om. And so whenever you chant Om, or anything, whenever you chant anything, what's happening is you are, among other things, you're resonating your body with the world. And you're sharing frequency. You're, similar to breath, sound, you're able to connect with the world through sound. Okay? And so Panikkar says this. He says, by constant repetition, the name re-enters the place from which it emerged, and thus assists in the reintegration of man. Om is not predominantly psychological or even anthropological, but rather the-anthropocosmic. Om is rather the very cry of the whole of reality, the very pulse of the human being as priest, the sacrificer of all there is. Okay. So this is just a sense of how the human and the world somehow intimately interconnected through this sense of spirit and that life force that we're all sharing, sound that we're all sharing, material that we're all sharing. Okay? So let me just wrap up this talk by looking at anthropocosmic yoga in the United States. So as I mentioned, I've been practicing yoga for maybe 11 and a half years. And during this time, as kind of an amateur scholar practitioner, I have interacted with a number of people where yoga and environmentalism are connected. Okay? And so in some cases, there's not a spiritual component to their yoga practice, and that's okay. And they see a connection between yoga and environmentalism because there is this tie of a countercultural movement that kind of bridges the two. And this countercultural movement is trying to address the tendency of the dominant culture to alienate humans from the rest of the world and to suppress interdependence, relationality, and embodiment. Okay? And then there's other cases where I've seen where yoga and environmentalism is a spiritual practice. And there is some kind of anthropocosmic thread that weaves the two together. Okay? So I'm going to look specifically at that kind of anthropocosmic yogic environmentalism. Okay? So one scholar that I mentioned before, Laura Cornell, she graduated from CIS back in 2006, and she's done a lot of work with an anthropocosmic yoga. Not necessarily using the term, I don't think, but spirituality, yoga, and environmentalism are very much intertwined for her. And her doctoral dissertation was on green yoga, a collaborative inquiry among a group of Kripalu yoga teachers. And so in her dissertation, she looked at how there's this ecological thread that you can see throughout the whole history of the yoga tradition. And what she's doing in her dissertation is trying to show more explicitly how you can integrate ecological practices into yoga, or ecological ideas into yoga teaching, or into communities of yoga practitioners. And so out of her work, there emerged a Green Yoga Association. And they put on some international conferences. I've been to a couple of them, very, very cool stuff. This Green Yoga Association has also developed, or published Green Yoga Times, which is a newsletter, and they've promoted the greening of yoga studios and yoga mats. It was the Green Yoga Association, I'm pretty sure, that first started bringing awareness to the fact that most yoga mats out there right now are made of PVC, and they're toxic to produce and toxic to throw away. And why are we trying to do a practice where this kind of harmful substance is being introduced into the practice? Like, yoga mats are a very new invention, and they don't have to be made out of PVC. They can be made out of hemp or rubber, or they could be a rug. You could practice outside. You don't need a mat. And so they were just trying to raise awareness of that. That was one of their big things. And in addition to green yoga, there's other forms of ecologically oriented yoga practices that have emerged recently, like earth yoga, eco yoga, and yoga Gaya. And yoga Gaya, let me tell you about yoga Gaya. It's very cool. I had the fortune of being able to practice with Hasita, who developed this yoga Gaya. yeah, she's this wonderful, I think, Austrian woman, little, short, warm heart. And what she's done is integrated the universe story into yoga. And she leads people through the story of the universe, integrating music in it, with all these different yoga movements. So you learn how to embody the great flaring forth. You learn how to embody the creation of stars, how it was when there's lightning. I can't remember all the terms, but I think we really need to get her to come and share this practice with us. It's so playful and so educational. So in addition to these kinds of ecological yoga practices, there is a yoga and ecology certificate program that's been going on since 2005 at La Jolla Marymount University in LA, led by Chris Chappell. And in this certificate program, weaves together experiential workshops and yoga philosophy to show the intertwinement of yoga and ecology. And some of the topics of the program are yoga and ecology, yoga and permaculture, yoga Gaia, green yoga sadhana, yoga and planetary healing. Very cool stuff. There's another important thing going on up in Vermont, I think in Lincoln, Vermont, and this is the Meta Earth Institute. And this has been developed by two yogis, Gillian and Russell Comstock, and they call it a Center of Contemplative Ecology. And it's an educational retreat center where they teach yoga, but then they also have art, they weave together community, and they practice permaculture on the land. So it's a very integral practice that they're doing there. Also, there's an excellent book, if you're interested in learning more about this subject, called Yoga and Ecology, Dharma for the Earth. It's edited by Chris Chappell, and it looks at the Vedic tradition of honoring the earth. It also looks at earth-friendly aspects of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, at the influence of the Bhagavad Gita on Arniness's theory of ecosophy, which is part of deep ecology, world-affirming aspects of Tantra, and models of yogic environmentalism. Okay? So those are just a few of things that are emerging right now that can really help show that this connection between the human and the world and the divine, it's all right there, and things are happening currently. So in brief, what I'm trying to say is whether it's sacred or secular, yoga can help cultivate a sense of anthropocosmic relationality. So yoga can help bridge different positions, say a secular humanist tradition and a religious tradition. If you practice it, you can have both kinds of stances. Likewise, if you are a religious person and you're not necessarily into the religion of yoga, whether it be Hindu or Buddhist or Jain, you can still integrate yoga into your life. So it can bridge interreligious differences. And likewise, it can bridge differences between anthropocentrism and non-anthropocentrism. Okay? And so one can only imagine how the world would be different if more yogis would start to practice yoga with this sense of an anthropocosmic vision. Okay? And so instead of acting in light or acting out of an anthropocentric attitude, an attitude that has been blamed for our current ecological, environmental, cosmological crisis, humans could transform on a planetary scale, developing a sense of being intimately interwoven with the cosmos. Okay? And so with the help of ecologically oriented yoga practices and scholarship, the yoga tradition is facilitating a great turning away from the anthropocentric worldview that has engendered our global crisis, and a great turning toward an anthropocosmic worldview that promises to lead to a sustainable, peaceful, and just future. So thank you very much. time for some discussion. So if anybody would like to discuss, or if you have any questions, if we should turn on music again. Yeah.
I'll go first, I guess. Thanks very much. That was really insightful and exciting for me because it turns out, a lot of overlap between some of my research and what you're doing. Yeah. I came to the anthropocosmic vision, or the cosmotheandric vision through Panikkar, actually, and I wrote down a lot of names of all these other scholars that are using this concept, and I'm definitely going to check that out. I wonder what you think about one of the ways I've been trying to incorporate this idea or this archetype of the anthropos into the ecological crisis and the search for an ethics that can help us transform our relationship to the earth. So what I'm trying to do is distinguish the anthropos as an archetypal ideal from the empirical species, Homo sapiens, to say that really what the anthropos is an evolutionary lure, or like a telos, that's guiding all of cosmogenesis, and that the human being, Homo sapiens, just is one of the exemplars of this telos in the universe on Earth. And what we call human in the archetypal sense is actually, it's not just us that exemplifies this, but we see it manifest through us. Right. But we see it manifest in various forms on the Earth. Yeah. And we might suspect, who knows if we'll ever be able to verify it or not, that maybe that there are on other planets there are life forms that have this sort of, like Teilhard talked about, this directionality to their evolution that tends towards more anthropic forms that may not look exactly like us, but they would reflect that anthropic drive towards more wisdom and more compassion in whatever particular species is manifesting this ideal. So this is one of the ways I've been trying to move away from anthropocentrism in the sense of really the homocentrism, Homo sapien centrism, of like our particular empirical species being the best or whatever, where looking at anthropos as an archetype guiding every form of life seems to de-center the focus on our species so that it's more of a cosmic phenomenon.
That's cool. That's good stuff. Yeah, and so maybe part of what you're getting at is seeing human people as one form of people.
Right.
And like and being able to have like an I-thou relationship with others, and calling a tree a person.
Exactly.
Like and seeing how there is certain values that tree has, and that we should relate to them not just as a means to an end,
Definitely.
but as the unique mystery that they are.
Yeah.
And so to be able to call them by name and interact in an intimate way.
Right.
Yeah.
Alan Watts once talked about this, and he said that, maybe every form of life thinks it's human, right? Just like we think we're the sole manifestation of the anthropos, but maybe every species kind of thinks of itself as the center of the universe.
Yeah.
And an ethics that's sustainable and resilient and compassionate would recognize the way that we're all people of different forms.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's really cool.
So my questions, maybe one and maybe multiple, kind of have to do with language and how you're saying things, but maybe we'll open out into a larger question or discussion or something. I've been thinking a lot. I'm currently reading Timothy Morton's Ecology Without Nature. I know I'm not the only person in this room reading that or who's read that. And thinking about how we think about nature. And I noticed as you're speaking that you either go between or say one after the other: ecological crisis, environmental crisis, cosmological crisis. And in your title, you chose to say environmental ethics as opposed to ecological ethics, or land ethic. And then another way that you put something is talking about the human as either embedded within the cosmos or intertwined with. And I'm wondering, I guess, do you see differences in those various ways of phrasing that? Does that mean anything for you as you're approaching this? And I guess my main point is like the difference between ecological and environmental, and how you see maybe any of that playing a role.
Yeah.
I hope that's not too...
No, I feel like I should have a good answer for this because I have training in it. But yeah, ecological versus environmental. Yeah, I mean, I think I do use them interchangeably a lot, but maybe I shouldn't. Maybe, you know, like if I focused a little bit more, and environmental being more of, let's see, how would you describe this? Well, ecology being, you know, the relations of organisms in their homes or in their environments. And the environmental often refers to what, like, anybody want to help me out here?
Well, I'm really just wondering what you actually think.
What I actually think,
no right or wrong.
Yeah, what I actually think is that it's not that big of an issue for me. And likewise with the embedded in the cosmos versus intertwined in the cosmos, it's not a big deal, like that kind of distinction, but maybe it would help to look closer at that. Yeah.
I go back and forth between wondering if it's a big deal or not.
Yeah.
And hearing you use them all interchangeably is kind of a relief, to be honest.
Okay.
But I wanted to pose that.
Just add something briefly that one of the ways I think about the difference is that ecology is usually defined as you did, the relationship between the organisms and their environments, but it's also maybe mainly the relationship between organisms and other organisms, right? So there's not, environment can sometimes imply like just the background, the place where organisms are, but I think really when we're studying ecology, there's no background, there are just other organisms, and especially if you're coming from like a pan-experientialist perspective, you know, molecules and what's normally thought of as non-living matter is actually smaller forms of organic processes, right? So it's, ecology tends to highlight, for me at least, and it could just be the way that, you know, I've used the word, it tends to highlight relationships among organisms, and that's really what reality is. It's a system of relationships among organisms, right? And there's no background to that. It's just there, and inert, right?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty helpful distinction.
So I really enjoyed everything. It was great. But I'm trying to understand the difference between anthropocosmic and spiritual, and if anthropocosmic requires spirituality, or if you can have anthropocosmic thinking consciousness without a spirituality.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
That's a really good question. I was thinking about this on the way over. Is the history of the term makes it seem like spirituality is connecting. But then when Chris Chappell was looking at the practice of observing the elements, it seems like you could be an atheist and not have any kind of spirituality per se. And you could see how observing elements can show you this anthropocosmic relationship by seeing how this stuff, this material, physical body is sharing its stuff with the world. And there's something really special about that. And so it seems like like maybe having a sense of awe and wonder at that kind of really stark similarity, that could still happen, and I think that could still be considered an anthropocosmic experience without necessarily seeing without calling it divine or sacred. I don't know if any of you got hung up on the spirituality component of the anthropocosmic vision, but I'd be really interested to hear if you have any thoughts about that. Having thoughts but not speaking thoughts. Okay, cool. You can just raise your hand if you're having thoughts. Yeah?
Yeah, in my experience with like different, say Wiccan or pagan circles dealing with the elements and energy work, I always felt it's always necessary, like or a lot of individuals, they make it a necessity that you have to have the spiritual and sacred side. Right. But I always didn't think of that. I said, well, I think you can have a scientific side, but you can also have just this sense of awe and wonder. You could also have the sacred side. So I think it's based off of what you feel more than what, I don't know, it's more of a feeling based than rather than a thinking based.
Yeah.
I feel it more rather than, but if I try to put it in the thoughts and say, okay, does this have to be a sacred element or a spiritual? It's a very complicated issue. So.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there seems to be something there with that felt sense. Like you might not know what to call it, but if you're having that intimacy, then it seems like something special is happening, and it's not necessarily needed to call it sacred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And people sometimes can get hung up, I think, on the terminology that they call it.
Yeah.
And then not knowing exactly, is this the right word to call it? Well, you might not have to call it anything, but there is that integral action and motion working with that energy and the elements.
Totally. Yes.
It occurred to me just now that yogic practice is like a set of kind of guided experiments by which the student eventually comes to a greater expression of indwelling capacities. And so to think of this in the context of anthropocosmology, it makes me think that this anthropocosmological vision is the insight that the universe is a yogi, at least in the sense that the universe is this yogi here now, but we can also take it more radically and think of the universe as, just as it is. It is right now practicing yoga. It is a yogi, which is again to say that it's enacting this experimental sequence of kind of attempts at expressing an abyssal pool of capacity, just simple capacity for expression. And so in that context, I can see that yoga is an expression of the anthropocosmological dimension of reality. But of course, that's just one contingent expression of this characteristic of the universe. So it's fascinating to see yoga as a cosmological event, right? See yoga as something the universe is doing. And it's fascinating to practice yoga in a way that helps you to further unlock that mode of perception or consciousness. But again, if we take the anthropocosmological insight seriously, then we don't have to be coupled specifically with yoga. And that could have some advantages. Something that comes to mind for me was I read a New York Times article about arguments going on in the Muslim community in New York City as to whether or not it's okay for them to practice yoga or not. Yeah. And it has everything to do with this question of, is yoga spiritual or not? What we're showing here, what we're discovering through yoga practice is that yes, it is spiritual. So now the next question is it Hindu? Could it be Muslim? And so insofar as yoga is too strictly tied to the anthropocosmological insight, then I think it becomes harder to communicate the anthropocosmological insight cross-culturally. So yoga is a way of discovering a reality which is then communicable in non-yogic terms, depending on the extent to which we've actually enacted these capacities that we've been experimenting with this whole time. So,
Yeah.
so what do you think about that?
Yeah. Like I've heard a little bit about the debate right now. Like, can we practice? Because it seems to be pretty religious.
Right.
It's a different religion, and maybe what is going on, or what needs to happen, maybe, is reclaiming of yoga as a human practice and not as a practice that's specifically Hindu, Buddhist, or Jain. And so, like, reclaiming the sense of, okay, so let's learn how to practice using our body, using our breath, using the energy that flows, learning how to calm the mind, how to gain just better overall health. And so, like that kind of reclaiming embodied practices as a human practice. And then so it could be helpful to see the roots and the tradition of the practice, just to learn a bit maybe how to do it safely, or how to do it with greater awareness. But then, then I don't think to practice yoga you'd have to be tied to the specific religious tradition. And so I guess that might go like for all kinds of embodied practices, like learning how to practice Tai Chi and Qigong without necessarily being Chinese, without necessarily knowing particular forms and movements, but just learning how to flow, learning how to unite your breath with your movement, with the earth that you're standing on, with all the elements. It's a super interesting question though. Like, can you practice a tradition without without being raised in that tradition, or without converting to that religion? Yeah. Yes.
There's sort of two parts to, I think it's a really interesting question as well.